God, I ask that you speak through these words and all of our meditations, that you send your Spirit into them, that they and we might be pleasing in your sight, for you are our rock and our calm and our peace. Amen. I'm betting that most of you here have seen the news this week. I did not know until this week how many of you still watch the local news, but it's a lot. In case you didn't know, this week First Church was featured on WCAX with both an evening and a morning story talking about the particular challenges we face here at this church, honoring our responsibility for our homeless siblings while simultaneously preserving a safe space for the worship of God and this distribution of social services. The piece was brief but fair and kind. And while they tended to cut the second halves of my statements, the ones that mentioned the gospel, the piece was intended to call state attention to the crisis we are facing, and let me tell you, it worked. I heard from dozens of folks across the state and even beyond who had seen the piece. And up front, I want to be very clear that the response was incredibly positive. It was sparking a discussion that must happen statewide if we are actually to begin to address the crisis that happens on our steps. But the original headline was unfortunate. Church draws the line on drug users and vagrants. Yeah. They actually asked me during the interview what I would think if that's how it were painted. And I had answered something along the lines of, let me be clear, it is not the folks on the porch we're saying enough to. We are saying enough to the idea that there's nothing that can be done. We are saying enough to the officials who say there are not resources or solutions. We are saying enough to the idea that this is just the way it is. They'd already had the production going with the headline. And let me be clear, they changed the headline very quickly when we asked. But that original headline, I think, is closer to how many in the community think of that situation, the situation downtown. I know many of us follow social media sources that are related to the town. Burlington Reddit, which is a network of Burlington folks who post and comment on Burlington news that interests them, well, they had quite a discussion about this piece. And I actually had a very hard time pulling these quotes for this sermon. It turned my stomach to open the website. There was the expected, of course, woe to you Pharisees who neglect justice, and the litany of ways we should be using our resources differently. Fine. But that was rebutted by folks saying simply Jesus didn't have to deal with heroin junkies, as if Jesus would have drawn a line rather than drawing up a cot, as if heroin junkies are somehow different from Legion that he faced. There were also those who identified the church response as compassion fatigue. And while sympathetic, I think you all, or I hope you all know that it is not that. I assure you our compassion is going strong. I've lived on a farm. Shoveling is shoveling, friends. No, that's not it. Of course, there were calls for more policing and criminalization, as you might expect. But most problematic, I think, were comments like this. This proves what we knew all along. These are not individuals that are down on their luck. These are individuals who are used by the system, enabled by the system, and take advantage of the system. Or I'll keep saying this, the easier we make it for them to stay in the status quo, the less likely they are to want to get help, and the more likely they will tell others that Burlington is an endless fountain of goodwill. Or even now I see people coming out saying, no, we have to help them, with zero awareness of the spectrum of situations in play. You should reap what you sow, Burlington. There were 103 likes for this one, the most. It was one of the most popular comments. Good, it says. We can't keep allowing their predatory and opportunistic behavior to plague our community. A good person would respect their surroundings. These are not good people. They never have been, and they never will be. The most liked comment. Keep in mind, these quotes are not from random folks on the internet. These are from our neighbors, many of whom use their actual names to post, not handles. These are not comments that they are embarrassed about. Or there's this one, the light will weed out the dark. The only good that comes out of this is demonstrating that most of the remaining individuals have absolutely no intention of getting better. By no means would anyone with good intentions associate with these people, nor let this happen. So let me tell you about these folks who are not good people. Predators, I think, was the term. I'm going to tell you about one, and I'm going to call her Tia. That's not her real name. But a while ago, she was in healthcare. And like so many, when faced with the onslaught of pain around her, she fell into addiction. The first few years we knew here on the porch, she went by Tia. It was a name that others had given her because she was taking care of the ones that were around her. She was large, she was good-humored, and she made sure her friends were safe. 2 weeks ago, I saw her, and she was as thin as a rail. She was by herself on our steps, almost invisible under 6 layers of blankets. She was startled and embarrassed when I woke her up to check on her, and her smile was gone like almost the rest of her, like all of her friends. And she packed up and left before I got back out with a coffee that I thought might warm her up. I know for a fact she's been in and out of rehab more times than you've had deadlines at work. Trying to get sober is her job, but no one is hiring. The short stay provided by the state's few beds doesn't get you through the withdrawal period before you're back on the street with nowhere to go. That's just the fact. We all think that we would make better choices, but research actually proves otherwise. When cash is tight, we all, across the board, make short-sighted decisions. That's science. And it doesn't act, what would you choose? $2 for the next hit to make the intense nausea and pain finally stop, to make you unaware of the biting cold and the burning hunger? Or would you take 300 more nights of sickness in the cold that you might not actually survive to save those $2 into something that could get you close to a roof over your head? We are not enabling her by letting her sleep. We're simply refusing to condemn her. Is she a good person? I don't know. I know that she's stolen to feed her addiction. I know that she's stolen to feed herself. But a good person? I have no idea. That's between her and God. But my own judgmental voices, which I am owning here, they make me more suspicious of those who want to demonize her so we don't have to see her. I've seen her care for the neediest among us. And I'm willing to bet that those 103 folks on Reddit who want to vilify her have not. Those who want to have many resources fall into temptation and are trapped by many senseless and harmful desires. I hadn't planned to preach on this, but in fact, this is the heart of stewardship. And I'm serious. The love of resources, the love of things, it's not about collecting. It's not about prioritizing your own pleasure for most of us. I think for most of us, it's actually about insulation. It's preserving a nice boundary around us and those that we love so that it feels, at least while it lasts, like we are immune. Like it's us and them. But life comes for all of us. We all have our own example: diagnosis, disease, disaster, death, layoff. I don't want to go through the litany. You all know, every single one of you has your own addition there. Something sometime comes and you ask, why me? And if we are lucky, someone will ask us back, why not you? Because then hopefully you'll realize the only control we really have is not in keeping the world away, but in controlling how we respond to it. We can be grateful and compassionate and generous, or we can live in fear with a closed heart and a high fence and a mind that divides the world into good and bad so we don't have to face the ways our choices create the conditions that we claim to despise. But you can never build a high enough fence. You build it high and higher, and the problems outside are going to grow. And any doctor will tell you that you can't treat what you can't see or don't know. So build a high fence, and by the time you see what you've done, it may very well be too late. So build a fence or open our hands and our wallets to care for one another. Jesus says the choice is ours. Advocate for further criminalization, poverty, and addiction, which is just about every social science study will tell you is counterproductive. Or you can advocate for resources to help move people from their poverty and addiction. But here's the thing, you cannot do both. You cannot serve God and wealth. You cannot serve God and security. You cannot serve God and safety. I'm not saying wealth is bad. Only when it, like a demanding job or a past wound or a dysfunctional relationship, becomes all you think about, all you feel, what you worship. And if it seems to you obvious that you can't worship God and wealth, I want you to think about it this way. You can't worship God in safety. There's a front page article in the New York Times today about how even as the living conditions for the majority of New Yorkers are getting worse, almost unmanageable, there is a new industry emerging for the hyper-wealthy. Dinner clubs with $200,000 buy-in fees, $10,000 yearly dues, to make sure you can always have a table that's insulated from the working class. Private in-home health care with yearly fees so you don't have to wait to get a doctor like the rest of us. Services where you can buy reservations at restaurants for fees of up to $650 so you can be seen in the best spots to eat. $500 IV drips of vitamin C. Now, obviously, this is news because we realize that's a really uncomfortable stratification, right? But how many steps up on our treadmill of consumerism is it? Pretty sure it's a matter of scale. From us wanting to see the addicted and homeless just go away, right? Without providing any path for them to do so. From wanting to stratify those who have less into those who are worth it and those who aren't. Because one of the most radical things about Jesus' ministry was that he cared far less about that, eating with those tax collectors and sinners, crucified with criminals, than he did about calling out those who would judge others and call themselves righteous. Now, at least a dozen times this week, I was asked how I do this work. And I'm grateful for that. But the reality is, friends, I have it easy. I really do. That's the good work right there. And it's built into my job. And I have you all. I get to say every day that I work alongside a bunch of people who care, who see the people on the porch, and I mean the people, not the categories they represent. Quite frankly, this week has been the most exhausting for me, because I find it far more draining to come up against folks who say the problem of addiction and homelessness is people who are taking advantage of the system. I don't even know what that means. There was a woman I know out there last week with a stomach virus, a ridiculous fever in the cold. Now, is she a paragon of moral virtue? She is not. But if that's what taking advantage gets you, God, please take a little more. She was someone's baby. Someone kissed her head and sniffed that newborn smell from her. She is still God's child. And that's what's exhausting, coming up against the simplistic dualism that allow us, like Pilate, to wash our hands of her. But this actual work is much easier because I have you. You have you. You want to know how to be content, friends? Look in the mirror and look around this room right now.
There are 100 of us in here to figure out how to do better and be better, to serve. You show up every week to deliver meals. You listen to people in their hour of need. You provide vouchers and a safe place to sit and warm up. You spend hours sorting clothes so that we can clothe the naked and keep the heat on at the same time. You are invested in raising your children with hearts oriented to compassion and justice. You cook for one another when there is need. You organize and advocate for racial justice in economic opportunity and safety and housing. You compile hygiene kits when the need is great. And each year in the middle of stewardship season, you take stock of your lives. And you pledge to use your resources to make something beautiful in the world. Each week with the offering, you check in to see how you are doing with that pledge, not just to God, but with yourself. You gather each week to make music, to make something beautiful and joyful. You gather to hear one another's prayers, to support one another, to pray and think and act in ways that understand the world is not as it should be, but God is still at work and is clearly moving here. So I have it easy. Next week, we will be asking you to bring your pledge cards in, offering both your time and your financial resources as you are able. The amount is between you and God. But what I want you to think about is this: which world do you want to invest in? Which reality? We have dreamed ambitiously about how we want to help the Spirit move in the next few years. This is going to be the subject of our meeting in just a few minutes. Building a little bit more of the peaceable kingdom here on this plot of earth, well, that's going to take all of us, our time, our financial resources, and how much you're able to do in this place versus other places. Again, that's up to your understanding of faith. But what I am going to say is I'm not worried. Not because it's not going to be a push, but I'm not anxious. Like the birds who do not toil, I know that I work with people who understand we are better together. That we are called to be a beacon of light, not to weed out the dark, but to overcome it. And who know, without a doubt, that the only way to do that is together. Thanks be to God.